You found a big piece of land available for sale at a low price, and you're stoked. Who wouldn't be? But then there's a moment of hesitation because you realize maybe this is too good to be true. Maybe that land is cheap for a reason. And then you realize it's gotta be. What is it? There's something wrong with this property. And you know what? In most cases, you're right. And your job as a land buyer is to find out what that is. And what we're going to look at in this video is a number of listings on the market today, current listings that look too good to be true. And what we're going to do, we're going to peel the curtain back and I'm going to show you the reason that this land is cheap. And sometimes it's obvious and you'll see it right away. And other times the reason that land is cheap is going to be a lot more subtle than you might think. So let's get started. This first listing is a 20-acre piece of land for sale at $68,000 in Live Oak, Florida. The listing is pretty compelling. You got a big piece of land here, but the reason it's cheap is also pretty straightforward when you look at the property's listing description, because right at the beginning it said this 20 acres is believed to be landlocked without physical access. This property has potential value for someone familiar with the process and expense to obtain legal access and put in a road or driveway to the property. See, what they're talking about, if you're not familiar, and many of you are, is that legal access refers to the ability for a person to access a piece of land without illegally trespassing on neighboring property. And now this property doesn't have that because there's no road access, there's no easement, there's no way that you can get to that property without trespassing. Now you're probably thinking, oh, come on, man, you have to be able to get an easement to visit your property. And you're right. States like Florida and many others have statutes on the books that say that landowners have to be able to access their property. But the process to do that is what is called easement by necessity or easement by right. Now it sounds great, but it's a civil litigation process that can take years and cost thousands or tens of thousands of dollars to actually complete. So is the juice worth the squeeze for something like that? I mean, in most cases, for inexperienced buyers, probably not. But the issue here on this property is that even if you had the legal access, it wouldn't even help the value of the property that much, because even if you had the easement, the actual cost of installing the driveway would probably be cost prohibitive to the point where it wouldn't even help the value of it that much. So the question is, who would actually buy this property and why? The answer is it's probably good for a hunter or recreational buyer. And a lot of times, people that want to go out and they want to hunt on a property, they don't really care if there's an easement, because if anyone catches them back there, they can just say that they own the land and that there's plausible deniability if a neighbor complains about an easement or anything. Plus those properties, they sell for lower dollars. And then those owners, they are able to meet the neighbors and kind of ingratiate themselves, because really the cheapest way to get an easement is to get your neighbors on board. But if they don't know you, they're probably not going to let you put a driveway in. The other thing about this property that I like is the timber, because you have potential timber value here. And even if you have a landlocked property, then you have the ability to sell the timber, because the timber company can get a timber easement. It's basically a temporary form of legal access. It doesn't require all the litigation and all the paperwork that you would normally have to do. Now, this next one is 20 acres in Wheelwright, Kentucky. This is listed at $25,000. Not a lot to go on when you look at the listing photos. So let's take a look at the listing description. The sellers purchased this property through a distressed sale and have not utilized or lived on the property. Good to know. Now, the last sentence says the seller will be issuing a special warranty deed at closing. Okay, kind of interesting. Why would they say that, right? Well, here's why. See, this land has title issues. When you buy a piece of land at a tax auction, tax foreclosure sale, when you get, like a treasurer's deed, a lot of properties that are sold through the county office that have been forfeited by their owners as a result of unpaid taxes, those purchases and transactions are not done with a title search. They're not accompanied by title insurance. So those buyers, the new buyers, bought the property without those benefits. So what could come up? What exactly would the big deal be? Well, listen, a lot of times the legality of a foreclosure process can actually be litigated later by the person that was forced to sell that property and give up their title. The other thing is that because there was no title search done, a lot of times tax sales don't reveal any liens, encumbrances, or even other potential owners that are outstanding outstanding on the chain of title that would be revealed by a thorough title search. Now, all of this stuff can be resolved, but it can also be a big mess, especially if you're not an experienced buyer or real estate investor and you don't know how to resolve these types of title issues. Now, let's take a look at this 65-acre property in Sellers, South Carolina that's listed at $99,000. Looking at the first few photos, it looks gorgeous and it's pretty hard to see what the potential issue might be. But then you see the swamp. Now look closely. The majority of the property is covered in swamp and wetlands, and the small section of potential uplands is located outside of the swamp and wetlands area. But in addition to the prevalence of the wetlands on the property, you also have limiting access because the easement access is undeveloped, meaning that if you wanted to build a home and put a driveway in there, what you would have to do is first survey that easement so you flag either side of it and you know exactly where your driveway is going. That's a couple $1,000 right there. The other thing you have to do is you have to actually install the driveway. But even if you had a dirt driveway, there's still going to be some grading and leveling on that stretch of dirt to even make it, safe to drive. But beyond that, if you want to build a home, a lot of lenders are going to require more significant improvements, and that can come with, expensive asphalt or gravel grading and paving costs. So you have 65 acres here, but all but 2.5 acres is wetlands. So your buyer for something like this is going to be a recreational buyer, could be, someone that wants to hunt that land. It could be like a really good, depending on the wildlife, it could be a duck swamp. You could see some particular wildlife in that area that may be endemic to that location. But you also have the opportunity to sell it to a home buyer, home builder, because you do have enough area on the edge of that property for a home, and it may make a good home site. But that's why this land is cheap, is because the majority of it is not going to be buildable. Beyond that, a lot of the good timber on this land was very recently cleared by the seller, and the timber that still remains on the property is strategically located on the far side of the swamp where it's going to be very difficult to get to it. So the combination here of access and wetlands is going to limit the value of this piece of land, and for that reason the land is going to be pretty cheap when it finally does sell. Now we're going to take a look at this 24 acres in Blountstown, Florida. It's for sale at $119,900 and it looks great. I mean, look, as far as we can see, there's no issues with access or with title. The soil does not appear to be too wet. The wetlands on the property, if there's any, it's very minor, and most of that land is going to be usable. So the question is, what is the issue exactly? Well, the issue to this piece of land is location. Now, you're an hour outside of Tallahassee, Florida, which isn't really an issue. That's actually sounds like a good location, but you're really in a part of the state where there's not a lot going on. Beyond that, when you actually look at the road leading to this property, what you notice is that you have surroundings on the stretch of road to your property that are incredibly desolate. And it's sort of like interesting, and there's a lot of great wildlife, but it's almost depressing. It's like, what is going on out here? And so when you see a lot of people that might want to buy this piece of land, you got to think about, by the time they get to the property, they're going to have an impression of how remote this location is. Because a lot of people, they want privacy when they buy land, and that's kind of the point of the whole thing. But there's a difference between the feeling of privacy and isolation. I think this one is sort of more leaning towards the latter. Now, that said, isolation can be good as well for short stretches of time, and depending if you're into that kind of thing. A great example would be somebody that wants to hunt that land, or a recreational buyer that wants the ability to go camping, or just pitch a tent and set up a campfire out there in the woods. Now, you could also put a home back there. You just wouldn't have that many neighbors. And so probably this may be a recreational buyer who's going to want to put a cabin, some type of lodge, or no real site improvement other than the ability to get out on the property and have fun out there in the woods. But it could also really be good for someone that wants a remote home site, a rural home site, and kind of get off the grid, get away from it all. Maybe even a mini farm, because you're probably going to have a zoning here where you're going to be able to kind of do what you want. I don't think that this county in that location, they're going to push you around too much as far as like land use and kind of what your site plan would be. Now, that being said, the property's listed at a pretty decent price, but they just had a price drop from $139,000 to $119,000. But I bet that if you were serious, you could probably pick this land up for closer to $85,000 or $90,000 if you really had the money or had the way to fund that acquisition and you really were serious. I bet they'd sell it at that price. So the reason that this land is cheap is because it's just remote. And so it's not really a feature on the site. It's more the surroundings of the property. And it's like, who's going back there? What are they doing? And like, is that a location where people get excited to be? That's kind of the question. So look, if you like this video and you're interested in learning more about identifying hidden issues on property, and you want to find out about the biggest impact on a piece of land that can affect price, I want to leave a link to the video here on our channel that's going to talk about the hidden role of soil in determining up to 80% of the final sale price of the land that you are potentially looking to buy, why it matters to price, and how to know if you're buying a good piece of land or a piece of land that you should not be buying. Let's take a look.